Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You ever just get completely stuck on those nature versus nurture debates?
Absolutely. They can really make you stop and think.
Right, we hear so much about how everything is in the genes, but I'm not so sure it's ever that simple.
It is tempting to look for those easy answers, though, isn't it?
Uh,
But like we're about to learn, it's way more interesting than that. We're diving into biological psychology by F.M. Toates today.
Sounds good to me.
Ah,
So are we scrapping nature versus nurture then? Like, what's the alternative?
think of it more like nature and nurture doing some kind of complex tango.
Hmm.
This book lays out 4 different levels to explain behavior. You've got the biological, the psychological, the environmental, and even the evolutionary, and they're all connected.
Okay, I think I see what you mean. So it's not enough to just think about the ingredients of a cake, right?
Right.
We need to factor in the oven, the baker, maybe even who they're baking it for. Each one of those things is going to influence how it turns out.
Exactly. And you would never just say the oven alone determines if a cake is good or not, would you? We can't just focus on one level if we want to understand behavior. They all affect each other.
Okay, so then how do genes fit into all of this? They're kind of how everything gets started, right?
Right. But this is where it gets really interesting. We have to stop thinking about genes like some kind of rigid blueprint. Instead, think of them more like a starting point. It's a set of instructions that can be read a bunch of different ways depending on the environment.
I like that way of thinking about it. So genes are like the basic recipe, but the environment, whether we're talking about the cells in your body or the entire world you grow up in, that can create some pretty big differences in what you end up with.
That's a great way to put it. So, for example, your genes might have the instructions to make a certain protein, but those proteins aren't acting alone. They work inside of living cells that are constantly changing and being influenced by tons of internal and external stuff.
I'm starting to understand how this all fits together now, but before we go any further, what about those animal models? Scientists get a lot of information from rats, right? I mean, how much can that actually tell us about human behavior?
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
That's the million-dollar question in biological psychology. I mean, it's not perfect. You can't expect to completely recreate how humans behave in a rat or a fruit fly. But at the same time,
You can't be serious. You mean those rats aren't the key to understanding everything about us?
laughs, well, no, but their brains can tell us some interesting things. The basics of how neurons work, like how they send information, that's actually very similar in different species.
Wait, are you saying that the way a neuron works in a rat's brain isn't that different from how it works in my brain?
You got it. Studying these more basic organisms can actually give us the building blocks we need to understand our own more complicated nervous systems.
Okay, so it's about making connections while still remembering that we're different. There might be some fundamental things we share with other animals, but it's our own unique evolutionary history that makes us human, right?
Exactly. And that actually leads perfectly into our next point. Let's discuss how evolution has shaped not only our physical traits, but also our behavior. That's where we're really going to see the problem with thinking it's all in the genes.
Okay, so evolution, but we're not just talking about how giraffes got their long necks right. We're saying that stuff we do today, our behavior, is connected to this massive force from millions of years ago.
Exactly. Even some of the most basic human behaviors, like being afraid of danger or wanting things that feel good, those things aren't random, you know? They're connected to our evolutionary history.
Okay, I'm with you so far. Can you give me an example, though? What kind of behavior that we see today could be linked to how our ancestors survived?
Well, let's take being afraid of snakes, for example. Now, I know not everyone is afraid of snakes, but it's a really common fear, and it makes you wonder why.
I mean, some snakes are dangerous, so it would make sense to be a little wary of them.
Mm.
I would want to just pick one up without thinking about it first.
You got it. So think about it. Our ancestors who were quick to avoid snakes were probably more likely to survive long enough to pass on their genes. Right.
And over time, those genes would become more and more common.
Exactly. It's almost like those cautious ancestors are talking to us through our genes even today and saying, hey, maybe watch out for that thing that's slithering on the ground.
Laughs. I like that. But it makes you wonder, how can something that happened millions of years ago have such a direct impact on us now? It still feels like they're totally different things.
It is amazing when you think about it, and what makes it even more interesting is that this evolutionary perspective isn't just about the past. It actually helps us see how genes and environment are always working together, even in the present, and how they affect everything from our health to our behavior.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, let's look at this one study that really highlights the connection between genes and environment. It has to do with rat pups and how their mothers take care of them. I'm sure you've heard that debate about nature versus nurture when it comes to how kids turn out.
Oh, absolutely. That's a classic.
So in this study, researchers saw that some of the rat moms were way more attentive to their pups, licking them, grooming them, just really taking care of them. And then there were other moms who were, well, not so much.
Okay, so far that sounds like a pretty typical family. Some moms are really attentive and some aren't.
Lass, exactly. But here's the interesting part. You'd probably guess that the difference is all about environment, right? Maybe the attentive moms learned it from their own moms or something.
Yeah, I would have thought it was learned behavior too, like something they picked up from their surroundings.
It seems like it, right? But here's where it gets really interesting. They actually discovered that the difference in how these moms cared for their pups was linked to, get this, variations in their genes. Certain genes made the moms more likely to be attentive.
Wait, hold on. Are you telling me that something like how a rat mom cares for its babies, which seems like it would be totally environmental, is actually genetic?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And it gets even more interesting. The pups that had those attentive moms actually grew up to be less anxious and better at handling stress.
So it's like those little rat pups won the lottery, right?
Right.
Not only did they get these great moms, but they also got all these amazing benefits because of it.
Exactly. But here's what really blew my mind. The care that the moms gave their pups didn't just change the pup's environment, it actually changed how their genes expressed themselves. And that's what made them more resilient.
No way. So you're saying that it's not just that genes influence behavior, but that behavior can influence how genes express themselves. That changes everything.
It's a two-way street. And this back and forth between genes and environment isn't just happening in rats, it's happening in all of us all the time, even when we're talking about complicated things like depression.
Okay, so how does depression fit into all of this? I mean, that's something we typically think of as a mental health issue, right? So how does it connect to evolution?
It's a really important question, and it makes us rethink how we view mental health entirely. This book argues that even something like depression could actually be the result of systems that were originally adaptive, helpful for survival, but now they're kind of out of whack because of the modern world.
Adaptive. I don't get it. Depression doesn't exactly seem like it would help you survive.
You're right, at least not in the way we typically think about it. But think about our ancestors for a minute. What if they went through a major loss, like someone died, or maybe there was a food shortage? How could feeling sad or withdrawn have been helpful for them?
That's an interesting way to look at it. I guess if you're grieving or something terrible happens, slowing down or withdrawing could be a way to conserve your energy and stay out of danger.
Exactly. It's like a pause button that was built in. It gave them time to process what happened, reassess, and figure out how to adapt to their new reality.
So instead of thinking of sadness or even short-term depression as a totally bad thing, maybe it was a way for our ancestors to get through tough times and increase their odds of surviving. That's amazing when you think about it.
It really is. But you know how any system in your body can malfunction, right? Well, in today's world, where we've got a lot of chronic stress and people feel isolated, it's like that pause button gets stuck, and that can lead to long-term depression.
So something we call a disorder today might just be an ancient survival mechanism that's freaking out a little bit because of the modern world. It really makes you think. But we've got all these outside things and all this stuff happening inside, plus our genes are in the mix. So how does it all come together to actually create behavior? What's going on in our bodies?
That's where things get really amazing. We're talking about your nervous system, which is this super intricate communication network with neurons sending messages at lightning speed and hormones going everywhere.
Okay, you've definitely got my attention. Let's dive into that. So we've gone through a ton of information about how our genes, our environment, even evolution all work together to make us who we are. If there's just one thing you want people to take away from all of this, what would it be?
Honestly, just remember that you're not some simple equation. It's not just about your genes, and it's not just about your environment. You're this constantly changing mix of so many different factors. And the crazy thing is, we're only just starting to figure it all out.
It's like they always say, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. But in this case, maybe it's more like behavior is what happens when your genes and environment collide.
Uh-huh. I like that. And don't forget that collision has been happening for a long time. I mean, think about how many years of evolution went into creating our brains and bodies the way they are.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it. It's like the things we do today, even how we react to things, are influenced by this ancient script that just keeps getting rewritten with each generation.
It really is incredible. And it reminds us that We can't just take a one-size-fits-all approach to understanding why people do the things they do. Something that works for one person might not work for someone else. And what we think of as normal, well, that's just a snapshot of a specific moment in time in a specific place.
It's like we have to accept the fact that it's all very complex. There are so many gray areas, so many things we still don't know. But that's exciting, don't you think?
Definitely. Each study that comes out, each new thing we discover, adds another piece to the puzzle. And for me, that's what makes this field so interesting.
I totally agree. So where do we go from here? We've talked about genes and environment and brains and behavior. How do we use all of this information in our own lives?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? For me, it all starts with awareness. The more we understand how these factors work together, the more we can make good choices for ourselves, our health, our relationships, how we deal with social issues. It all comes back to understanding this stuff.
It's almost like we're getting a secret decoder ring for human behavior. We might not figure everything out, but at least we're starting to understand the language.
That's exactly it. And once you understand the language, it can be really empowering. We're not just along for the ride. We can change, we can grow, we can create our own paths within the limits of our biology and our experiences.
So instead of getting stuck in those nature versus nurture debates, maybe we should be asking ourselves different kinds of questions, like how are my genes affecting what I do in this situation? Or how can I change my environment so it helps me be the best version of myself?
Now you're thinking. It's about moving past blame and judgment, both for ourselves and other people. We have to remember that everyone's experience is incredibly complex.
We're all works in progress, right? We're all getting shaped and molded by this incredible combination of forces. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder. If our behaviors, our choices, even our personalities are all shaped by this back and forth between nature and nurture, well then what does that mean for free will? People have been debating that one for centuries, and we're not going to solve it today. So we'll leave you with that. Until next time, keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and as always, keep diving deep.